Next, from Springfield, Ron Davis, the director of the U.S. Department of Justice's Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services, gives an address on the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. This runs about 25 minutes.
We've worked together at the executive session at the Kennedy School at Harvard University, and Ron published a paper as part of that executive session about police role in reentry. And I mention that because I think it's a good example of the diversity of Ron's career and his background. He had an illustrious career at the Oakland Police Department and then became the chief, rose through the ranks in Oakland and then ultimately became the chief of police in East Palo Alto, California, where he became very well known nationally as an innovator, not only in the area of reentry, but in the areas of crime suppression and in dealing with citizens who had significant drug problems. East Palo Alto is a very challenged community, and Ron really rose to that challenge. And that should have been a good indication, and I think was, to a lot of people, that Ron was going to be the right person in the right place at the right time. And many people have said that now since he has become the director of the COPS office. And certainly in this unique time in history for law enforcement, I would echo those words that he is the right man in the right place at the right time. Ron has focused in his tenure as the COPS director not only at running the office very efficiently, but also being a champion for obtaining federal funds to use to provide innovations for state and local law enforcement agencies, and not just putting officers on the street, which is an important part of what the COPS office does, but really pushing out best practices and practices in law enforcement that are based on science and evidence, and in a way that's has been very helpful to the profession. And I can tell you, when a situation blows up across the country, and there have been many situations blow up over the past 24 months, Ron and his staff very quietly but very quickly are usually the first people on the scene to help and to offer the support of the Department of Justice. And best of all, as I learned this morning, he is an SIU alumni. And so I welcome my fellow Saluki, Mr. Ron Davis.
Good morning, everyone. Okay, so good morning, everyone. So I have a couple questions there first. First, as a close to 30-year veteran of being a cop, I don't know if I should be offended or feel at home, but when I came in, I saw like a whole bunch of donuts. Was that like a pun? Right? I just said plates of donuts. So, and I did have one, but thank you very much. Brought back some memories. Let me thank Sean for that very just wonderful introduction. I'm not worthy of that, but I appreciate it anyway, and I'll pay him later. You know, I think back to when I met Sean, and just what has changed even since 2007 is amazing. Some of the discussions we had at the executive sessions, and we'll get into some of that today. But I think my purpose here today is I want to give you the background for the task force report, give you a few stories about the work that they've done and why it's important to us. And I would tell you, as Sean mentioned, it's been close to 30 years, 20 years in Oakland, beautiful city, very diverse city with some significant challenges. And then 8 years, close to 9 years as the chief in East Palo Alto, much smaller city, but extremely diverse, very challenging. And it's those experiences, working in diverse communities, challenged communities with public health challenges, as we just heard, that helped shape my thought about policing and where we need to go. And I would say in that 28 plus years, as I sit here and look, it's clear to me things have really, really changed. So although we're at a period of time where there's a lot of challenges, I think before we face the challenges, let's pause a quick second and take a look at the success. When I came on as a cop in 1985, I remember sitting in a police car thinking that this is the most high-tech thing I've ever seen. And they had a big old TV screen thing in there called a mobile digital terminal. If anyone has been here over 20 years, you know what I'm talking about. And it was cool that you could actually run a license plate. If you were lucky, you got assigned this really high-tech thing called a pager. And it just basically, it would buzz and give you a couple numbers. And to get one, you had to do a credit check. Interesting for that. Now look at my 13-year-old daughter. She has more technology than I could ever imagine. She can monitor the global economy. She's monitoring things that I wish she would not monitor. But nonetheless, we've advanced greatly. When I look at my academy class and looked at the diversity of the class, it looks different than when I was a chief and look at the last class that I saw. When I look at the tactics that we're using, that as far as to fight crime and community policing, we have advanced tremendously. And so we know we've made progress in the last 20 or 30 years. We know that community policing has advanced, and we should pause a moment and accept and acknowledge that. But if we're going to be true and honest with each other, then we also have to acknowledge that we left a lot of people behind. And that in many cases, the very tactics that have led us to this significant crime reduction has had the collateral damage of destroying neighborhoods, whether intended or not. Mass incarceration, contrary to popular belief, did exist, was not justified, and we need to find better alternatives. That the idea that we can arrest our way out of a crime does not exist, that we need to solve problems. It was interesting to hear, the doctor talk about public health. And my partner in crime at the Department of Justice wrote a quick note to me that crime is a disease, reminding me, since the doctor opened up that venue, that's exactly what we should look at, that violence is a disease. It spreads very similar to a disease, and how we respond to it should be like the medical field responds. I love the concept of do no harm first. Imagine if that was the thing for law enforcement. Do no harm first. That should drive us before we think about our tactics, our strategies, and the things that we're going to do. So if you look at where we're at right now, we're at this very defining moment. We're at a moment that I've never seen in history, in my 30-year history. But with all the crisis that's going on, all the challenges that we're facing, it provides one of the most unique opportunities I've seen in 30 years. And you know what they say about crisis? I don't want to do the quote because 20 people told me they were responsible for the quote, and so I just gave up. But with any crisis, there's an opportunity. Now, what I always say is that opportunity is usually a very small window of opportunity, which is open up for a very short period of time. And if we don't go through that window together in that short period of time, that window closes, and what opens up instead is a very large door of past mistakes, which means we go right back to doing the same things we did 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and you know what they say about repeating the same activities and expecting different results. That would make us pretty much insane. So we need to take advantage of this idea of this window of opportunity, and we need to focus on that. So we have this defining moment. We actually have what I would call a new era in policing. Not a moment, not an effect, not a specific point in time. We are entering a new era of policing in which communities are making very clear that they want law enforcement to evolve even further. And this is the most intriguing part to me. And law enforcement is making very clear that we need to evolve and advance community policing. This is not a we versus them. Everyone is accepting and acknowledging that we need to move forward, we need to build trust, we need to build relationships to advance. So we can do this together. This civil rights movement of this generation does not have to be a skirmish line between police and activists. It should be a line that does not exist because police and activists should be walking side by side, hand by hand, trying to get rid of the systems that we know have the bad outcomes. Because even when you have great cops, if the systems are bad, they're still going to have terrible outcomes, despite their best efforts. So we have an opportunity, we have that moment. Following Ferguson, I think the president really recognized that and really thought this was an opportunity amid the challenges and the discourse and the crisis to do something about it. And so in December of 2014, the president announced he would create this task force. Now the challenge for the president, he had to find 11 crazy people to agree to serve on this. And you met one of them earlier, Sean, so you know how that went. He was very successful. You know, he picked 11 people, 11 amazing people to serve on his task force. Now, being the director of the COPS office, my office, my amazing staff was tasked with providing administrative support, and I served as the executive director. And that's a fancy way of saying I had a front seat to history, to watch these 11 people do the things that we need to do as a country. What was amazing is 11 diverse people. They were scary at first because I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I don't know how these guys and ladies are going to come together and build consensus on what time to go to lunch, let alone recommendations for the field. And you have some of them here today. You have Tracy Mears, you have Brian Stevenson, you have Sean Smoot. But we had basically academics, we had civil rights attorneys. I mean, I remember one civil rights attorney announced herself by simply saying, hey, my name is Connie Rice and I sue departments for a living. That's how I made my living. We had people that basically came fresh off the demonstration lines in Ferguson and in New York with Brittany Packnett and Jose Lopez that were just young in a relative sense, but full of just fire and energy and wanting to demand and change and really getting ready for, I won't say battle, but for a struggle. We had 30-year, 45-year police chiefs that had more service stripes than you could imagine. And all these 11 diverse individuals came together. We had academics who write extreme long articles. You hear Tracy laughing? You hear Tracy laughing? You know, that can, well, hopefully they can divide things into quadrants and things of that nature. But anyway, no, we had academics of the likes like Tracy Mears who spent her life doing research that we know makes a difference to the field. So you had this diverse group come together. And what was interesting when the final product was done is that these 11 people came to consensus on all 60 recommendations. Now, in part, it was because the facilitator that we used was outstanding. And I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about Jim Koppel with SAI, who we used to really facilitate. So he probably has more stories than I do of the great work that was being done. But they went through these recommendations and built consensus. I watched them agree. I watched them disagree. I watched them debate and agree to disagree, but also watched them change each other. I watched a young civil rights activist that was on the front lines wondering if every police was the enemy, starting to laugh and joke and have lunch with and talk to a 45-year police veteran. I watched a 45-year police veteran, a police chief, change his views about young people, about the demonstrations and about the movement. And I watched a police union person, like Sean, basically sign off on things, and I still don't know how he pulled this one off, on things like independent review and investigation and open up to the concept that maybe traditionally that we like to fight against because it's out of our comfort zone. I watched these groups these individuals come together, form a consensus around the issues of the day. And so a couple of things that come out of the task force I think we should learn from. One is when you bring people into your inner circle, they should be as diverse a perspective as the president did. You don't surround yourself around people that agree with you because that makes life too easy. You surround those that disagree, those that have varying oppositions and positions, and those that you can learn from. Two, you build a process that allows them to debate and to argue and to discuss. And the other thing we did for the task force, which was great, is they decided that instead of going into some quiet room and coming up with the solutions, that we would have a series of public listening sessions so that we could hear from the field. And so we had 7 listening sessions around the country, listening to hundreds of witnesses and oral testimonies and written submissions, where we heard from police officers, union leaders, executives, community leaders, social media leaders. I mean, every stakeholder you could think of came and testified so that the task force can make some informed decisions. As a result, the product you have in front of you then is not just a product of 11 amazing individuals, it's the product of a nation. It's a product of a field where people are contributing, where they're giving the views, where we had a lot of information to look forward to. And I can tell you, once this product was done, and the team will tell you, and we gave it to the president, he was very clear what he wanted. Well, first when he said he wanted it, I didn't tell you this, he said not only did I want this task force put together, but I need a report on my desk in 90 days, right? So these 7 listening sessions, these 100 witnesses, and all this work we talked about was in 90 days. So the task force members, in addition to teaching and litigating and running police departments, had 90 days to put together a report that's in front of you. And you can imagine that's an amazing task that they did. So that's amazing. But once it was done, the president looked at the members of the task force and immediately went to this switch saying, this is great work, but now how do we make this document become alive? How do we now entice the field to implement it, to make sure that this does not sit on a desk and does not gather dust, that is not just another report that kind of just withers away. And I think it's venues like this in which we ensure that it does not. As you look at the report, you hear more about the substance of the report, the topics of it. They are relevant to today, they matter today, and they provide us the most unique opportunity, I think, that we've seen in the last 3 decades. If you look at where we're at right now, I would challenge every law enforcement individual in the room, community leader, academic, everyone in the room, all the stakeholders, to really take personal responsibility to advance the work of the task force, the recommendations, to take a look at where your department is at, where this field is at, and where we need to go, because the small window of opportunity is closing. Now, it's interesting to me that many people are reading this moment as being something of the negative. I've heard recently on TV, someone said, and I'm gonna get myself in trouble, but I apologize, I have to address it, that somehow the racial divide is greater than it was 10 years ago or 8 years ago. And I think what this moment has provided us is that I don't think the racial divide is greater. I think what is happening is that the conscience of the nation has been awakened. That for many communities, this racial divide was alive and well. People knew it, they felt it, they couldn't put their finger on it, or more importantly, in many cases, could not get others to acknowledge or to validate it because people minimized it and dismissed it. Social media and videotapes are brought to light that you can no longer ignore the concerns of certain segments of our community. It has brought to light that some of the challenges are not just made up, that they're real. It also brings to light what the overwhelming majority of police officers are doing a tremendous job. So we know that there's a balancing act, but we now have this opportunity. I like to think of it, and maybe in medical field it's the same thing, that where we're at as a nation would be like a patient that maybe has a disease which has very slow symptoms, right? That you're sitting there, that you're working every day, you're living your life, and you don't know, and there's a few little signals that maybe a trained doctor can say, we should do some exams. And as we x-ray and we exam, then we find something very significant. Imagine if the patient came back and says, look, doc, I was fine until you started checking on me, right? Well, actually you weren't. I'm just the one that discovered it for you. But now that we know it, we can treat it and we can heal together as a nation. So to say that we're in a worse place, I would disagree. What we have is a president who has examined, who has probed, and who has diagnosed a problem that already exists and now is becoming the doctor to help cure it by coming up with a task force, the methods, and an agenda that will help advance policing and criminal justice reform in this country. And so as we look at where we're at, we should always remember that. This is not new. I don't think it's something that's increasing in my personal opinion, but it's something now that we do is in front of us. We cannot ignore it. The symptoms are clear. The diagnosis is clear, but we have the ability to cure it. We have the ability to treat it. We have the ability together to make it stronger and make it better than it was before we get started. I just hope we take advantage of that. I hope together we'll come together and really, really embrace the notion that we are in it together. I would say this, if community policing is going to advance in this country, then we have to accept a couple notions. One, that the police and the community are co-producers of public safety. That communities must accept responsibility in partnership with the police for public safety. It's not something that you can just dismiss to the police department. And if we do that, then as we face crime spikes and decreases and increases, we do it together without pointing fingers. I reject any notion right now that suggests that as some cities are facing spikes in crimes, that somehow that our officers, these outstanding men and women, are not doing their job, because we know all evidence is to the contrary. We know they're doing their job every day, that they're putting their lives on the line every day, but we still need to know why crime is going up. We need to work together to get to the root causes, not respond to symptoms, not respond to anecdotes, but data, real, and we'll hear from NIJ later, data and real information to proceed forward. So we know we have that opportunity. We also know that we need to look at policing in a democratic society. And to me, this report puts one of the biggest challenges we have. What is the role of a police officer in the 21st century? What is the role of a police officer in a democratic society? And I'll close with a thought I want you to think about that may help guide that. When we talk about public safety, too often we measure that simply by whether crime is going up or down. And we know the problem with that is that crime is not just the purview of the police. That's why we're co-producers of public safety. As we redefine public safety in this democracy, in the 21st century policing, public safety cannot just be the absence of crime. It must include the presence of justice. And if both equations are not there, then to simply brag about reductions in crime have little solace to the very communities that have been disenfranchised, that are disconnected, that have had the collateral damage to them based on the strategies that we used. It will be very ineffective. And I'll close with a story from Chief Bratton in New York. When he took over NYPD for the second time, I had the ability to go to his swearing in. And he shared a story that at the time he took over, I think NYPD might have been sitting, or New York was sitting at maybe a 40 or 50-year low in homicides. And so as he started working his way around the city, he was expecting the kind of the congratulatory, the celebratory notion that crime is at its lowest in 30, 40 years. The community has to be happy, but he did not get it. Surveys were showing that police satisfaction rates did not go up because crime was going down. And what he realized then is that how you fight crime matters as much as the crime reduction itself. That the fact that the statistical crime went down did not change the perception of people in the community because they were still held very disenfranchised and felt really victims of the strategies themselves. So as we fight crime in the 21st century, we do so with this new definition that just reducing crime is insufficient. We have to do it in a way that's consistent to who we are as a nation, to our core values, and most importantly, to the bedrock principles of the Constitution. If we can't do that, then we should not expect any celebratory or high fives as a result of that. I thank you guys for coming here today. This is going to be hopefully a very productive day. But I really want you to get excited, if you will, when you leave here, to not just go to another seminar, another session, but to pick this book up. To, they say, we're going to send you out with the book in one hand and your whatever drives you in the other, and go out and spread the word, pass the word, drive it, go to your police departments, ask them if they're implementing this, help them, drive them. We have this opportunity. Do not let history come back. We'll come back 5 years from now and say that this was the generation that missed a moment. Let us look back 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and say that the relationship we have in policing in this democracy is stronger than it's ever been, that the police officers are having higher job satisfaction, that violence and crime is down, that relationships are strong, and that we did it because we took advantage of the opportunity, that we did not run from a challenge, we embraced it. We did not fear public scrutiny, we require it. This is a new generation, this is a new era, and you are to be leaders in that new era, so thank you very much for coming. Have a great day.
One of the nice things about inviting a lot of the speakers and helping put a symposium on is they give you a few minutes for personal privilege. And so I'm taking mine now, and I would actually like to ask you to come back up here, Ron. As Ron mentioned, he was the executive director of the President's Task Force. And as many of you know, certainly those of you from Illinois know, in this past legislative session, the Illinois General Assembly passed Senate Bill 1304, which was a widely branching, wide-reaching police reform bill with a lot of new training requirements. Included the Police Body-Worn Camera Act and a number of other things. The bill is in your materials, and I'll be talking about more specifically some of the training things that are in there in a later panel. But I wanted to take this opportunity to present something to Ron. So, Director Ron L. Davis, Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services, United States Department of Justice. In recognition of your tireless work in advancing the cause of justice everywhere and your extraordinary leadership as the Executive Director of the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing, this pen was used by Illinois Governor Bruce Rauner on August 12, 2015, to sign Senate Bill 1304, now Public Act 990352, into law. The Police and Community Relations Improvement Act, included within this new law, made Illinois the first state in the nation to implement by statute several recommendations included in the final report of the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing.
Wow, thank you.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.